In the spring of 1962, as the Cold War cast a long, chilling shadow across the globe, a document landed on the desk of the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. It was audacious. It was shocking. And if it had been approved, it would have changed the course of history forever. This document was titled Operation Northwoods. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're re-diving deep into one of the most controversial and unsettling proposals ever conceived within the United States government. Plan so extreme it sounds like a plot from a spy thriller, but this was no fiction. This was a very real, very detailed plan, drafted and approved by the highest levels of the U.S. military. So, what was Operation Northwoods? At its core, it was a proposal for a false flag operation. The objective? To create a pretext for a full-scale military invasion of Cuba and the removal of Fidel Castro. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, led by Chairman Lyman Lemnitzer, felt that public support for a war against Cuba was lacking. Their solution was to manufacture it. The plan laid out a series of horrifyingly creative scenarios designed to provoke outrage among the American public and justify military action. These weren't vague ideas. They were concrete, detailed plans. One proposal suggested staging a Remember the Maine incident. This involved blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blaming it on Cuba. The document even detailed plans for conducting mock funerals for the victims to maximize the emotional impact on the American public. Another part of the plan involved orchestrating a terror campaign in American cities like Miami and Washington, D.C. This included planting bombs in public places, staging riots, and even fabricating evidence that would implicate Cuban agents. The idea was to create a wave of fear and anger directed squarely at Castro's government. But perhaps the most chilling part of Operation Northwoods was the plan involving civilian air travel. The proposal suggested swapping a real, registered civilian airliner filled with college students on a charter flight with a remote-controlled drone replica. The real plane, with its passengers, would be secretly landed at a secure airbase. The drone, painted to look identical, would then fly over Cuba and broadcast a fake distress call saying it was under attack by Cuban MiG fighters. Then the drone would be destroyed by a remote signal, creating the illusion that Cuba had shot down a commercial American airliner. The world would believe that hundreds of innocent students had been killed, creating an undeniable justification for war. Think about that for a second. The highest echelons of the U.S. military were willing to use deception on a massive scale, to manipulate the emotions of their own citizens, and to simulate the deaths of Americans to achieve a foreign policy objective. The document explicitly stated the goal was to develop a plausible incident that would provide irrefutable Cuban aggression. The proposals were described as pretexts which would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. So, who came up with this? The primary author was General Edward Lansdale, a legendary CIA operative known for his expertise in counterinsurgency and psychological warfare. But the plan was officially signed and endorsed by all the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the uniformed leaders of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, and sent to Secretary of Defense McNamara. What happened next is a crucial turning point in this story. When President John F. Kennedy was briefed on Operation Northwoods, his reaction was one of complete and utter rejection. Kennedy, who had just weathered the Bay of Pigs fiasco a year earlier, was horrified by the proposal. He saw it not as a viable military strategy, but as a dangerous and immoral deception that would betray the trust of the American people and could potentially trigger a war with the Soviet Union, Cuba's powerful ally. Kennedy told General Lemnitzer in no uncertain terms that there was no chance the United States would ever use military force against Cuba under such circumstances. He effectively killed the plan on the spot. Soon after, Kennedy denied Lemnitzer a second term as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, transferring him to a NATO command post in Europe. It was a clear signal that this kind of thinking was unacceptable in his administration. For decades, the existence of Operation Northwoods remained a secret, buried in classified government archives. The public knew nothing of this shocking proposal. That all changed in the late 1990s, thanks to the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. This law led to the declassification of thousands of government documents from the era, and among them was the Northwoods memo. It was first brought to public light by researcher James Bamford in his 2001 book, Body of Secrets. The revelation sent shockwaves through the public. For many, it confirmed their deepest suspicions about the lengths some elements within the government were willing to go to achieve their aims. It blurred the line between historical fact and conspiracy theory, because here was a documented, officially sanctioned conspiracy of the highest order. Operation Northwoods serves as a stark and powerful reminder of the importance of civilian control over the military. It highlights a moment when military leadership was prepared to engage in deception against its own people to start a war, and it was the civilian leadership, in the form of President Kennedy, who acted as the essential backstop upholding the ethical and legal principles of the nation. The document also provides crucial context for understanding the deep mistrust and tension that existed between President Kennedy and his military advisors. This friction would continue and escalate, culminating in the Cuban Missile Crisis just a few months later. During that crisis, Kennedy once again found himself pushing back against military leaders who advocated for a more aggressive, preemptive military strike, an action that we now know would have likely triggered a full-scale nuclear war. Operation Northwoods is more than just a historical footnote. It's a case study in power, ethics, and the potential for deception. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many other plans like this existed? How many were approved? It demonstrates that sometimes the most outlandish-sounding conspiracy theories can have a basis in documented reality. It shows a dark potential within governmental power structures, a potential that was, in this case, thankfully checked by a president who refused to cross a moral line. The story of Operation Northwoods is a chilling lesson from the Cold War, a reminder that the line between protecting a nation and deceiving it can sometimes become dangerously thin. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into a truly unsettling piece of history. If you found this story as fascinating and important as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into hidden corners of our past. See you next time.